on today's Story Beat.
You know, for me, I always felt scared that if I lived a full life, meaning if I took time off to do something else, or if I got married, or if I had kids, or if I traveled, if I did something outside the arts, that it was going to prevent me in some way from growing in my craft or having my career move forward. You know, like taking a huge turn, becoming a playwright instead of sticking with straight acting. And I have learned that that is the absolute opposite, that your instrument is all of you.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, the actress and playwright Sarah Bierstock, began writing plays in 2014. Her first play, Honor Killing, received its initial development through the John Drew Theater Lab at Guildhall in East Hampton. It went on to a world premiere that ran for 8 weeks at Florida Studio Theater to full capacity audiences and has been produced at numerous theaters around the U.S. Her second play, Mad, was workshopped at Florida Studio Theater as part of the 2018 Playwrights Collective and in spring of 2019 as part of the National New Play Network's Women in Playwriting Festival. Sarah has received commissions for her monologues and short plays from Center Stage in Baltimore and the Neo-Political Cowgirls. She was commissioned as part of the Playwrights Project to write a play based on the Pandora's Box myth called Pandora and Her Top Secret and Exceptionally Important Scientific Mission for Theater for Young Audiences at Florida Studio Theater. It's scheduled to tour in the fall of 2022. Sarah's been nominated for both the Blackburn Prize and Primus Prize. As a stage actor, Sarah has toured nationally in the productions of Lewis and Clark and Laura Ingalls Wilder. Off-Broadway, Sarah's been in the musical Chess, Jacques Brel Returns, Committed the Musical, and Gift of the Magi. Other stage highlights include playing Mary Hatch in It's a Wonderful Life, Wendy in the world premiere of Leonard Bernstein's Peter Pan, and Virtue in Anything Goes. For all those reasons and so many more, it's my great pleasure to be joined on StoryBeat today by the multi-talented Sarah Bierstock. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure to have you join me today. So let's go back in time and look at a bit of your history. Where did the theater bug first bite you? Were you a little girl, or when did it first hit you?
I was definitely a little girl. I come from a family of doctors and nurses, strangely, but my dad had a really strong affinity for the arts. And I first started playing instruments. I think I played the violin first when I was 4. I played it from age 4 to age 10, I think. And I played the piano and the clarinet and the alto sax. I think somewhere around age 9 or 10, there was a television show that was called Rags to Riches.
Okay.
And it was about 4 or 5 orphans, and they all sang and danced to 50s songs. And I became completely obsessed with this show. And I decided that I was, meant to replace the one girl that was no longer on the show. That I needed to be like the 5th Rags to Riches girl. And I remember sitting my parents down and saying, I need to show you something. And I took them to the basement and I sat them down and I sang them a couple of songs. I have no idea what I sang, but I sang them some songs and I said, I'm going to be the next girl on the show. And they kind of looked at each other and they very sweetly said, well, I think we better give you some lessons. You better have some voice lessons and acting lessons and learn how to dance. If you're going to, if you're going to hop on the show and become the next girl, you need the tools. So they put me in classes.
How old were you at this time?
I think I was around 9.
9. So you had what many people don't have in the arts. You had really supportive parents.
I did. I really did.
Some people, their parents go, no, you don't want to go down that road. You're never going to make a living.
It's true. My parents were really incredible like that. My middle sister was a ballet dancer and she'd already started dancing at that point. And, my father particularly always said, you can do anything you want. He really instilled that in me young. And they were big proponents of higher education. So I don't think they in any way thought, this doesn't mean you're not getting an academic education, but they were very willing at that time to sort of see what happens and give me the tools that I needed to learn those creative avenues and to just see where it went from there. So
well, especially at that age, at 9, or, as you when you're a little kid, and someone says, would you like to do this? And they give you the opportunity to try it out. Sometimes it turns out not to be your cup of tea, but then sometimes in your case, like in your case, or in my case, it turns out to be the thing that you want to do forever.
Oh, absolutely. And I totally flew with it. And I never looked back. That was the beginning, and it just soared from there.
So was that your first look at being an actor of some kind? I mean, was it being
I
on
think
stage?
so. Well, I had seen, my parents would drive us into the city. I lived about an hour and a half, 2 hours from the city, from New York City, and they would drive us in. And I would see Broadway musicals. I saw Annie, and I saw Les Mis, and I saw The King and I as a child. So that certainly made a very strong impression on me. That was probably my first.
What was your first musical?
Probably The King and I.
The King and I.
Yeah,
probably. Do you remember who the king was?
I can't remember whether it was Yul Brynner. It probably was not, but I have him stuck in my mind as who I saw. But I may have filled that in at this point.
Well, everybody has Yul Brynner in their head because he was the quintessential king. So all right. So were you thinking about writing at that time as well, or did that come later?
No, absolutely not. In fact, that didn't come for many, many years.
So, and many people think of the theater or music or something like that as a calling, like I've been called to do this. Do you think of that for yourself?
I don't think I would profess that, but I do feel like nothing in my life touches the satisfaction and the joy that it gives me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's now a part and parcel of your soul.
Absolutely. I've tried to leave it many times. It does not shake off easily.
No. If it's in your bloodstream, it's not going away.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. That's even if you do go away from it, it's not going to go away. So did you then go to school to learn to be an actor?
I did. I went to Cap 21 at NYU. I didn't complete the 4 years there. I did 2 years there. And I transferred eventually to Bard College in upstate New York.
Sure.
But I did a foray in Galway, Ireland for a year. So it was actually a really eclectic college experience because it started out in a very intense conservatory setting. And I think by the time I got there, I felt like I had been doing it my whole childhood. I'd been in voice and tap, jazz, and ballet and theater study. I've been doing all of that since I was 9, and I felt like I needed to kind of branch out a little bit.
What was Galway like? What did you do there?
Well, my last year at NYU, I had shifted from Cap 21, which is part of Tisch, into the Gallatin program. Mm-hmm. And while I was in Gallatin, I was still doing some theater, but I started dabbling in philosophy. And so I thought, well, when I get over to Ireland, I'm going to focus on philosophy. I'm going to stop studying theater, but maybe I'll just perform while I'm there. So while I was there, I took predominantly all philosophy classes. And then I was able to do some performance through the college and in Nuns Island Theater in Galway while I was there.
Was that a great learning experience by doing it in Ireland?
Oh, it's fantastic.
I mean, because the Irish are incredible.
Yeah, I mean, everything, the Irish culture to me was such a refreshing change. And I particularly loved the women because the women were just feisty, really smart, really strong, very unapologetic in many ways. And so, it was just such a fabulous experience to dive into, not only in an academia setting, but also get on stage with, women my own age and kind of dive into those cultural changes and make art together. It was really cool.
So, all right. So you go and you start to study philosophy, which is another genre topic, whatever you want to call it, area of study that has likely no money at the end of it.
Indeed.
So you've gone from theater to philosophy, neither of which are going to make you much of a living.
I know.
Unless perhaps you're a teacher, which is a little steady, but otherwise forget it, unless you hit the big time, which does happen to people. how did learning philosophy or being a philosophy student, how did that impact your acting first and then subsequently your writing?
Well, immediately, I wouldn't say it impacted the acting. However, when I came back from Ireland, I transferred to Bard College. And when I got to Bard, I had, 47,000 credits. And I thought, I do not want to start over. And one of the things that's so fantastic about that school is if you work the system, I basically sat down with my board and said, I would like to propose a major. And they let me put together a major that was sort of merging the two, philosophy of art. That's what I created. And what I ended up doing for a thesis was I wrote a short play that was investigating a certain philosophic concept. And then I wrote my thesis about the one act play and then did a reading of the one act play. And that was the first time I really kind of integrated those two things.
What do you mean by you wrote it about the process of writing the play?
No, I wrote the play. The play was called The Lack. It's such a funny name. It's called The Lack. And I was trying to investigate a philosophic idea through the doing of the play. And I wouldn't say it was particularly successful. However, it was like, putting a philosophic concept into the work and seeing if you could embody it.
Were you trying to employ a dialectical methodology in the play so that you could explore that philosophical tenet?
No, I was trying to let the idea lead through action.
Interesting.
And yeah, which I found, it's not impossible, but it's really hard. It's really hard and it's really sophisticated. And for my, 21-year-old brain at that mind, it was, I don't know that it was, that it accomplished what I set out to do, but it was a way for those worlds to merge. And there are certainly people that do that incredibly well. I didn't walk away from that feeling like, oh, I found my calling. This is something that I really want, a genre that I want to work in. But it was a way for me to kind of bring together the two components of my mind at that time.
And would you say that that's continued to have a resonant influence on your work?
I would say that it stretched my mind. And I think that anything that stretches your mind impacts your work. But in many ways, I left it there. I left that part of my life behind me.
Well, that's good to know because, there's no such thing as getting to a successful outcome without going through a lot of failures or things that don't work well one way or the other. And that's what you're talking about. That was a first effort for you, and rarely do first efforts work for anyone. So
yeah, it's true.
So that I think that's perfectly acceptable. Who were you looking to at that time? Who were your influences? Who did you look to as either a playwriting influence or an acting influence or both or something else?
I think at that time I was so entrenched in musical theater. I was looking at, I was an 80s kid. So when I was looking at going to musical theater or responding to musical theater, I was seeing Les Mis, I was seeing Miss Saigon, I was seeing Tommy, I was seeing Into the Woods and Sondheim. I always responded a little bit more to things that were on the heavier side, a little darker, a little bit less poppy, a little more lyrical. I was studying, when it came to the philosophy at that time, I was studying Camus, I was studying Descartes, I was studying Kant, but it wasn't a conscious decision on my part to sort of meld those thinkers. I was just sort of invested in what I was discovering and what I knew to be true, and sort of letting my own story come out of that.
You were doing what I would like to think of or call marinating. You were just absorbing the whole of it, and something then will percolate up.
Yes.
Whether it's actually related to those specific things or not necessarily relevant at all. So do you, were those your writing heroes, or were you talking about your heroes were Sondheim, Boblil Scharnberg, those are your heroes?
I think the composers and the lyricists were my heroes at that time.
Do you see yourself writing musicals someday?
I would love to try. I'm intimidated by it. I think I'd like to get there, but right now, it's not my next step. It might be 5 steps from now.
Okay, so as you know, I've had a little experience in that world, and my honest advice to you and to all the listeners that are listening to this is there's really only one way to get there, and that's to just do it. So at some point, you got to get over your intimidation and just go try it and again fail at it until you get good at it. So that's just a way to think about it. I want to talk about playwriting for a bit, and then we'll talk about acting after that. Do you write every day, or are you a really taskmaster at it or not?
No. I write when I have something to say. I write when I have a specific project that I'm working on. And when I don't have either of those things, I do not write.
And what do you do then to develop your writing talents when you're not writing? Are you a reader? What do you do?
I am a reader. I feel like 98% of the influence of my writing comes from acting, because I've spent my whole life acting in plays and studying plays as an actor.
Excellent.
So most of my knowledge of playwriting comes through the doing of being in a production or studying a play and studying the play from the inside out.
So you've never gone to school and taken classes in playwriting specifically?
No, I have not.
And so your study of plays and playwriting comes from being in plays.
And because I've had the fortune of having plays produced and having workshops and readings, I learn exponentially every time I do one. It's like having the walls blown out around me, because I learned so much from that process.
No doubt.
Getting to work with actors, with dramaturgs, with directors, the rewriting, which is everything, is a constant stimulus for me in that room, in that setting. I'm just learning in real time. And that's been a tremendous privilege. So
as I have taught students for years, the craft of writing is coming up with story and how you lay it out and how you define things and so on. And the art of it for me is in the molding of it in rewrites. It's all about rewriting.
Absolutely.
And so you're saying that, and you've had that big time in various productions where you were forced into it, where you were confronted by the fact that something wasn't working right, or someone told you it wasn't working right, and you had to go fix it or work on it.
All of the above.
Oh, of course.
I would say of the four, what I would call, I'd say, quote, completed plays that I have, every one of them I have probably hundreds of drafts, maybe 50 drafts, or I save my drafts by date now, so I can go back and see, but and there's years in between typically, because I'm working on it so long. Yeah. Sure.
And are you ever bothered by the slowness of that and the repetition of it? Does it ever bother you?
There've been certain pieces I've gotten impatient about and put away, but I usually have the instinct that I need to live a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Like I just haven't learned what I need to know in order to implement that into the script yet. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I haven't changed. I feel like I need to change before I can change the piece.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. You have to grow into things sometimes.
Exactly. So some of the pieces have taken considerably longer, but I have an imminent sense of that when it's happening. If it's something that I feel like I need more time on, I give myself that freedom.
I drove many of my students crazy, because I would say to them, look, you're 19 years old. Mm-hmm. You need to live a little life before you understand this in a deeper way. Mm-hmm. And they'd look at me like, but I understand this now. No, actually you don't.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. And sometimes pieces come to me and I know what they are. I know what the skeleton of it is immediately. And then there are other pieces that I have that sense of, like, I've got the main idea, but I also understand that this needs to go away from me for a while and I need to come back to it.
Okay. So let's go back to your process of starting. What usually happens for you? Do you usually get a concept of a story first, or do you usually get a character in mind first? What is most typical for you?
I'm very visual. So I usually have sort of a whole aesthetic image in my mind of some part of the play, whether that's the top of the play or the action of the play. But I do typically see the stage, and I can see the set, and I can see some of the actors. And that is usually a visual starting point for me. Mm-hmm. There's only been one instance when that wasn't the case. So typically I have that visual flash, and then I tend to be a sort of a purge writer. So I will write the whole play. I'll write the skeleton of the whole play sort of in a couple days or a couple weeks. And then I'll spend months to years editing it.
Is that first initial, as you call, purge draft, is that essentially your outline, or do you outline first?
I do not outline first. The only time I've ever outlined, I wrote a play that I ended up throwing the entire play away. I was like, okay, that's not for me.
Did you feel like you were in a box of some kind?
I did. I felt limited by it, and I felt a little too strategic. Like I typically feel like I'm just a vehicle and the characters are kind of coming through me.
Mm-hmm.
And I somehow didn't feel like I had the freedom to just let my fingers drive freely the way they normally do.
So this is one of the most common themes that I have in my studies of creative people, and also in talking to many creative people. It's one of the most common themes, which is interesting that you said it. It's that you're not actually creating anything. You're a conduit for it. It's coming through you.
That's absolutely how I feel.
And you don't know where it's coming from, whether you can call it whatever you want. You call it the universe, you can call it God, you can call it whatever you want. It's coming through you.
Absolutely.
And so when you're moved to write, that's what's happening.
Yeah, and it's also it's the whole idea, the whole piece, the whole story comes through like that, like a wash almost. Like it's not my business to control it. My business is to just get the whole thing out, and then later on I can come back and sort of add in, mold it through my lens a little bit more, but it doesn't initially feel that way.
Do you feel once you've gotten that first draft out and now you're working on multiple revisions, do you feel like that's a little, what would the word be, a little more technical or mechanical as opposed to that first draft, which is just purely just getting it out? Or
Totally. And that's where the technique does come in. I mean, so for instance, when I wrote Honor Killing, which was my first play, the first pass at that almost, it so vaguely resembles where it landed many years later for so many reasons. Not just because I had to learn about playwriting, because of course I did, but because I had written something that was extremely based with a journalistic eye, and I didn't try to understand journalism, or I didn't try to understand what would be realistic as a journalist to how to present the information correctly. I just wrote it. So I had to go back from the beginning and speak with journalists. I had to go back and interview people and learn how to take what I'd thrown out there and put it into a context that made sense. So yes, it's always many passes of technical revision, but then also creatively, there's the technique of creatively reshaping too.
I find this very interesting that you actually do a first pass at it and then you go do research.
Yeah.
That's I would say that's not all that common. I think most people, they'll do their research, they'll read, they'll study, they'll think about characters and plot and all the rest of it, and then they'll try to do a purge draft of some sort. But you're just throwing it out into the world and then working it from there.
Yeah, because it feels like it's not mine. It's mine to fix, but it's not mine to control on the way out.
Would you say that the stories that have come to you have a similar basis or similar thematic movement to it, or are they all very different?
They're very different. They're very different. I think at this point, I'm definitely a little heavy on female driven. I don't have a lot of male characters. So that is a thematic through all the pieces at the moment.
Do you want to be known as a woman's writer?
I want to be known as someone that can do a lot of different things.
Sure.
I'm proud of writing strong female voices.
Of course you are.
So I identify with that, but I don't necessarily want to feel like people think I can only write that.
Well, I asked the question because you're still in a relatively young stage of a career. You're not, you haven't been doing it for 40 years. Right. So you have the opportunity to expand that horizon. And here's what I'm saying to you is not get pigeonholed. Where everybody that wants to commission you only wants to commission you because you write women and that's all you do.
Sure.
And there's by the way nothing wrong with that. It's just what you want to do.
Right. Well, my first piece when I wrote Honor Killing is extremely political, and it's actually more men than women in that cast. So I certainly didn't set out with that intention, although the thematic is very much about empowering women and women's voices. And I feel like those male voices are crafted well. It's just that the next couple of pieces happen to also be female centric. So, but I'm by no means mean to only write those kinds of stories.
But you're also going to, the idea is going to come to you. You're not going to go seek it out. So if another idea comes down the road and it's all about 12 women, so be it. That's what it is. That's where the work is.
That's how I feel.
Of
Yeah.
course, of course. Do you, when you're working, do you work with the audience in your mind's eye, or are you only writing for yourself?
It's a good question. I kind of want to say it depends on the piece. Because, so for instance, I wrote something called Mad, which is, I have a narrator breaking the fourth wall a lot, and it's very physically comedic. And so I do think about the audience in those settings. I'm not trying to please the audience. I'm writing for myself in the sense that I'm in that one sort of like what tickles me, the idea that I'm trying to get across, but I am thinking about them in terms of how they're perceiving what I'm trying to relay, if that makes sense.
And I'm going to assume that you've had instances where audience members have come up to you after a show and said something that you went, that isn't what I meant at all, or that was not
Yeah,
my intention.
sure.
And what does that make you think? How do you react to that?
I think when that first started happening to me, I was a little thrown off by it, but now I find a lot of freedom in it because I think it's hilarious that as clear as you can be in your intention, it's people are so subjective and they are going to respond to their life experience is going to color how they see things no matter what you do.
Well,
So
it's an art form. You can't,
yeah.
People are going to perceive it how they perceive it.
They are. And sometimes that's great. I think, wow, I just, I put in 10 ideas. To me, 9 of them were all sort of the same and one was different. And they cued in on that one different one. It's just such it's so telling about sort of the human experience, right?
Of course. And, I think most great writers, playwrights, writers, screenwriters, doesn't matter. They at some point give up the ghost of trying to get just what they want out to everyone. And you finally realize at some juncture that once you finish the piece and put it out into the world, it's no longer really yours.
Yeah,
it's the audience's.
Yeah.
And
that's very freeing in time, not right away, but it's freeing. To me, I find that freeing now.
By the way, I love the concept. I don't know if you've ever heard this, maybe you have, the concept that what you're doing is writing a time machine. Did you ever heard that concept?
No, I haven't.
So what that means is you're writing a play and it's in the 2020, 2018, whenever you write the play. And as long as the play exists in some form that people can see it and read it or perform it, it will live on forever. And so that's why we have the Greek plays from 2,700 years ago. And that's a time capsule. We're actually going into the mindset of somebody that wrote those words down. That's what you're doing. You're creating something in time. So that's part of it. And that perception will shift over time as the audience changes in time itself. Do you do anything special to find inspirations for stories?
I wouldn't say I do anything special. I mean, each of the stories that I've written have come from just being invested in life. So whether that was, reading the paper, whether that was listening to podcasts, whether that was just having experiences with real people in time and place, and or sitting back and watching what's happening in the world and educating yourself. Each one of them came through the lens of what was happening around me to some degree.
So, all right. So let's talk about production, because you've had a couple of plays produced. Talk about your production experience. Do you now, when you think about working with producers, and obviously you've worked several times with, I'm sorry, what was their name? Florida Studio Theater. And lovely for you to have a group that really likes you and your work.
Yeah, so I'm so grateful for that.
Well, and well, you should be, because it's not, not everybody
not
gets
common.
it. So.
No, I know that. Yeah.
Right. So do you find yourself approaching the work differently now than when you first started because of your experiences working with producers in production?
Well, I try to consider certain elements and then also to throw them away. So for instance, I will be aware of a very large cast is going to be harder to produce. So the money piece of it, the actual production, what would be inhibiting to the producer does come into my mind. I just wrote a play for them, the Pandora piece, which I'm really excited about. And I wrote it as a two-hander. And I would not have done that in the past. I would have put, my 9 characters in, and I would not have understood the implications of that. And so certain elements I do consider now in terms of just, do I want this to get produced? And if I do, how do I need to come at it? Sometimes I try to throw that out the window if I feel like it's getting in the way of the story I'm trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're alluding to one of the great dilemmas, I guess, of theater today. Of course, we're still talking sort of in the end stages of the pandemic, where there's been no theater at all. But theater for a long time has gotten more and more closed, where it's not massive casts and big sets and all that, because people can't afford to produce shows like that.
Yeah.
So that's what you're talking about, is that the theater comes to you and says, hey, no more than 4 characters or something like that. And that way they feel like they can actually afford to produce a show.
Yeah.
It's challenging. It's challenging because the old days of Clifford Odets and so on, where you could put 50 characters into a play, that's just not happening anymore. What do you do to stay on target and deadline once you have an actual deadline? Do you have any particular methodology for staying on deadline?
I love a deadline. I love having, I have 2 small children, and so I often have very little time to actually write. And what that does is it condenses it makes me write a lot better, a lot faster, and in very specific windows. So,
focuses your mind, doesn't it?
It focuses everything: my mind, my time, my imagination. I've always kind of liked a deadline, but it's really catapulted since I've had kids.
So do you have a thought in your head that you might want to write for TV or film at some point?
I would love to, and I also would love to adapt 2 of my plays into screenplays, because I think they will translate well.
Well, again, no reason not to. Just go ahead and do it. But the interesting thing about working in the TV industry in particular is it's all about deadlines. It's all deadlines. So you'll have a ball if you like a deadline.
Yeah.
Because they're going to say to you, I need it by next Tuesday, and that's it. There's your drop dead deadline. You've got to do it.
I have a little bit of a type A personality that pops up from time to time, so those deadlines work for me.
Well, that's great. Have you worked with dramaturgs at all?
Only twice. Twice I have. Once in Denver on the production of Honor Killing, and then again, actually a couple of times now that you mentioned it, I have. Yep.
Did you? And you don't need to mention names or anything. Did you find it helpful, or what was your experience like?
I find it very helpful. It's, playwriting, as you know, can be very lonely.
Yes, indeed.
Very isolating. And with Honor Killing, I had done a tremendous amount of research, not in my first pass, but over the years of rewriting.
Right.
So the first time I was granted a dramaturg, I think they were sort of taken aback by how much research had already been done, and that would have been the work that they would have dove into. But having that extra set of eyes and having someone who's going to go and dig into the minutia and really ask all the questions that you perhaps thought you had put in the work, but it wasn't there yet, or just to stimulate you or challenge you about what's on the page. And I think it's a huge privilege to have someone able to do that.
Have you always been able to be present during rehearsals? Is that something they privilege you that?
Yes, there have been times where I've been zoomed in, and I've also had 2 children right in a row. So there were a couple times I also had to leave because I was having babies. But everyone has those.
Oh, why should that get in the way?
that was a bit of a hindrance from time to time.
So when you have been present,
yes.
what did you find that was useful in being present, aside from the obvious, which is you're getting to see the play performed, and now you get to actually hear the words actors saying those words. What advantages are there? How did it help you?
To be in the room while actors are working on material?
Yes.
Oh gosh, in so many ways. I would start with, you can immediately hear what sounds authentic and what doesn't. You can hear where the pace is off. You can hear when the scene's too long, too short, if something's not making sense. You can sort of look at the characters differently to see if they're actually going through an arc or not. You can sit down and discuss with the actors how they're experiencing the character and what maybe isn't there that they feel their character needs. It's just completely invaluable hearing it off the page versus just sitting there reading that.
Well, that's it. In fact, that's the whole game right there, is because ultimately it's designed to be read by people, or not read, but spoken by people on a stage. And so without hearing it, it's still just, I guess, a piece of literature. It's not a play. It requires the actor. How important would you say it's been for you to be a working actor in your life as a playwright? How big has that been in terms of impacting the work that you've done?
That's enormous for me because I'm not an educated playwright. I'm
Mhm.
an educated actor.
Right.
So
Right. Sure.
Totally instrumental.
It's all right. So how does that work? What do you read your plays out loud to yourself?
Yeah, I do.
So you know that it's going to come out of an actor's mouth easily and not trip them up.
Yes. I mean, when I'm initially writing, I don't, but once I get into a deeper phase of editing, I'm going to read all the characters out loud, probably fairly quickly. And as soon as I'm stumbling on anything, I'm going to stop, hear what's working, what's not, change the punctuation, change the verbiage. I read all of them. Yeah.
It's amazing, is it not, that you can write a line of dialogue and on paper it looks fantastic, and then an actor just can't say it for some reason.
They're tripping, it's when it's meant to be spoken aloud, it's a very different experience than to be read in the mind.
That's exactly it. And it is, for me, it's always a kind of like, I don't know, surprising when they just can't get in your head, it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
And the actor can't get it out of their mouth.
Or also, invariably, there's a line that just isn't quite right, but you think you're going to get away with it, and then it just keeps coming back. It's just not quite right. It might be a very small change, but it needs to happen. And maybe you haven't fixed it yet, but it's not going away until you alter it a little bit.
So for you, what have been the biggest challenges you've run into in production, and how did you overcome those challenges?
I think I've been so lucky to work with really smart directors that I haven't felt like once things got into production, there was anything that was so enormous that it hadn't already been addressed. Certainly there needed to be rewrites, but
have they ever thrown you notes that you couldn't handle or didn't know what to do with?
No. I mean, I certainly maybe didn't know how to fix it immediately, but I never felt like that I couldn't handle it, or that there wasn't a way to make it work.
So is your philosophy on taking notes from directors, dramaturgs, producers, etc., what's your philosophy? Take all the notes, don't question them, and then work on them later? Or how do you do it?
Well, it depends. So, I've had a whole life of taking notes as an actor, and as an actor, the answer to receiving a note is yes, okay. In general, you're not in a position to push back on a director's vision, or if a playwright's giving you information about your role, it would be very perhaps a foolhardy choice to really push back, unless it was really worth it. If you felt like you were being told something about your character that was just so antithetical to that, your understanding of that character, and then maybe you'd have a conversation about it in private. But in a rehearsal room, you're certainly not going to do that. You're going to say thank you.
So that's great to hear, because I love to tell people, and I have told many, that the best way to take a note is to take the note.
Yeah.
Don't argue over the note. Somebody's had a reaction to something, and whether you agree with them or not, just sort of figure it out as you go.
Sure. You need to make it work. And if you can't, that's a different thing. But the initial information is digested, and then you're going to say thank you for the note, and you're going to try to make it work. And again, if it's really a challenge, there's a different route you're going to take to deal with that.
Has there been a time where somebody gave you a note and you went off and thought about it, and you came back and said, no, I'm not changing that? Again, you don't need to name names. I'm just curious if you had that experience.
I have, and I think it's really tempting as an actor, because if you're in a long run and you take a note and and it does not work for you, after the 15th time, and then no one's in the room, the producer's not in the room, or the director's not in the room, it's really hard to not go back to the thing that you think is better.
How about as a writer? Have you had that instance where somebody gave you a note as a writer and back you came and said, I'm not changing that?
There are times where I have said, this is really important to me, and it's less important to me that so I'll give you an example. Someone might say, I don't think the audience going to understand why this piece is in there, why this line is in there, or why this choice you've made, that you're continuing to include it. I think that might I don't think they're going to get what you're going for there. And sometimes I have said, it is not my job to make them understand everything.
Oh,
Sometimes
that's brilliant, by the way, because that's exactly right. It's not your job to make the audience understand everything.
Yeah, I need them to understand most of it.
Yeah,
You know?
they have to sort of understand who the characters are and how they relate and what the story underneath it is, but they don't have to understand everything.
Right, because I have not lost sight of the fact that, again, the audience, every single person in there is subjective. And so they are not going to get everything I'm trying to say anyway, no matter what I do. So if something's really important to me, I will include it, but I will discuss it with the person if it's the director, or if it's the literary manager, somebody who I have deemed appropriate to receive that information from.
Sure.
If it's Aunt Tilly who's at the talkback, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm not going to.
You don't listen to Aunt Tilly?
I mean, I love Aunt Tilly. I'm glad she came, but I have a nice little filter over here for Aunt Tilly to go back and have some tea.
But God bless Aunt Tilly, because she paid some money to come see your work.
She did, and she has strong feelings about it.
That's a very useful thing, to have somebody paying to see your work. Question I ask lots of people on this show that I really love to hear the responses to. For you, what makes a good story good? Conflict.
And for me, I have to be stimulated. If I'm not stimulated, I can't stay in the story. So there's got to be authenticity. So I've got to connect with those characters. They've got to come against a conflict, and there's got to be some resolution. Hopefully they persevere in some way. But the stimulus, I prefer to not be told an answer. I don't really like a didactic sort of theatrical experience. I like to be stimulated so that I'm ruminating for a while after I leave. And I hope to write pieces that are less conclusive and more probing.
So for you, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting, for you, what makes a good story good is that it leaves something open for the audience to come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
I think that's quite valuable. So let's talk a little bit about acting per se. We've already talked a little bit already about it, but do you still consider yourself to be an actress?
I do.
And so you plan to go forward by doing both this thing called acting and playwriting?
I do.
And
yes.
Maybe screenwriting at some point.
Yeah.
And perhaps novels or whatever you want to do down the road. How then has the playwriting, let's go the reverse, impacted your thinking as an actor?
It makes me a lot more critical as an actor, for sure, of the actual text on the page. My ear is tuned in a way that it didn't used to be tuned to the writing and to the words, both in that I want to honor them very specifically, but also if the writing is not good, it gets under my skin a lot more than it used to.
Well, sometimes you have to take a job, don't you, where the work is not really, let's call it your cup of tea, but you need the money and you take the job. That's called being a professional.
Yes.
And so I'll never forget, I was in a show one time, because I used to do a little acting a long time ago, and the director was a very, very fine actor. And we were all grousing. It was in school, and we were all grousing about this awful play we were doing. And he said, look, you've got to treat this like it's Shakespeare. And I've never forgotten that. That's a really valuable lesson to me, is that you've got to treat everything that you're hired or you're supposed to do like it's the best that's ever been written.
It's your job to do whatever's in front of you to the best of your ability, to bring everything you have to it, right? So sure, sometimes the writing is not what I want it to be, but I'm certainly not going to say anything about that. It's just an awareness.
One of the, I guess, tenets of being a great actor is that you do everything you can to be in the moment, even though you've memorized the lines, you know where the blocking is, but you've got to be in that moment. And how's that thinking or that feeling, how's that as a playwright then impacted you as an actor? Where can I get into that moment from the playwright's perspective? Does that happen for you?
I think the biggest shift I've had to make as an actor, now that I'm also a playwright, is that when you are an actor, you focus so much on your character's journey and your character's singular experience. And when you're the playwright, you can look at the whole play. You look at the whole story and the larger ideas that are being presented. And I think that what it's given me is I now have some freedom as an actor to go, you know what? This whole play, it's not about me as much as I think it's about me. So how can I serve the whole play? How can my character serve the whole play where I think I couldn't quite get there before? I think I was just so much more interested in my character's selfish journey that it was harder to sort of see where that piece fit into the larger puzzle. And there's a little freedom in saying, sure, my intentions and my character's needs and wants and objectives are important, but they're important only in so much as we are telling a larger story.
Have you, since you've been a playwright, you started as an actress and you've become a playwright as well. Have there been any number of aha moments for you as you've started to become more and more of a successful playwright?
There have been many aha moments. Are you asking in terms of the writing?
Well, both the writing and the acting. Have you have there been those moments where you go, wow, I really didn't understand how this operated before, and aha, I now get it?
Well, I think even just in sort of the formatting of a play. I mean, I don't write in a technical sense. I don't look at the page numbers and examine where the conflict starts or doesn't, or I don't do that until much later in the process. But as an actor, I was always sort of dissecting per scene, sort of where was my character at, in this, let's say I come onto the play, I'm in the play 5 scenes, so I'm doing my work and my intentions for those specific scenes, but I wasn't looking at it as a whole necessarily, which is sort of the same idea we were just talking about a second ago.
Well, ultimately, you're a part of the storytelling, whether you're writing the play or whether you're in the play, you're still telling a story. And so that understanding of it, I think a lot of actors don't have that understanding. When they do, I think they become much fuller.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to get there unless you're forced into that. If you're sort of shook out of your own lens, because you spend so much time having to use your instrument to dissect yourself in order to dissect this character to tell them authentically. So we come by it fairly, I think.
So would you call yourself a people watcher?
I think I'm observant. I'm not sure if I'm a people watcher, but I think I'm observant.
You're observant. So you are, because as an actor, you are obviously playing characters who aren't you.
Right.
But part of you is going to be in that performance no matter what you do. And so it's, I'm asking you, I guess, if you find it useful to be observant of how people are in their own worlds.
I think it's everything. I mean, I think that's when you're an actor, you're studying behavior, and your behavior is colored by, your physicality and your emotion. I mean, I think we if you're not watching that, if you're not learning how people physically move through space and their behavior, then I don't think I don't know a lot of actors or good actors that are not observant. I'm not sure that you can do that.
I agree. But I asked the question because I think there are some actors who are very, very much in their own heads. And I think that shows sometimes. What's your philosophy toward auditioning? How do you approach auditioning?
Oh, I hate auditioning. I hate auditioning. I mean, it's not true. It depends on what it's for, how much time I have to prepare, whether it's in the room filled with the music director and the producer and the entire team versus am I just self-submitting? Now there's so much is done by self-submission, so that's very different, right? I try to look at the audition process as an opportunity to have fun and to perform. Usually it's harder for me to get there. Usually I'm a little bit more.
Is it nerve-wracking for you to audition?
It can be. If I really want it, it's harder for me.
Is it better when you don't want it?
Yes.
Or I think don't want, it's probably the wrong question to ask you. Is it better when it's neither here nor there for you? You're just doing
100%.
and that way, when you go in with a sort of, I don't care whether I get it or not attitude, that's usually when you're going to book something.
Absolutely. And having two small children in a row will do that to you because you no longer have time or energy to care in the same way. However, when you don't have something really distracting you, when I didn't have something really distracting me, that was a lot harder for me in the past.
All right. So when you've landed a part, you've got the gig, aside from reading the script, which is the first step, obviously, what's the first thing you do to approach the role? How do you look at it?
After I read the script, I'm going to study that character. So first I'm going to look at everything that's written, and then I'm going to fill in for myself everything that's not written. So usually I would do sort of a scene by scene breakdown of, well, I might do, on my own, might do a character study of where's this character from? What is their education? What is the social life? What are their relationships to the people that are in the play? Both what's been given to me in the play and then what's not been given to me in the play, and where do I need to fill in?
So you're looking at the play for facts and evidence that are in the play, and then you're creating the backstory or the world that's not in the play.
Right.
And that's sort of what a playwright does too. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, you're functioning. The director, the playwright, and the actor are sort of three legs of the same coin, if you can say it that way, because you're all pulling to tell this one story, but you're coming at it from different perspectives.
Yeah.
I've always found that a little bit interesting. Okay, what do you have special techniques that you use for learning lines? Are you a good memorizer?
I'm decent. If you have the opportunity to memorize through action, meaning you're up on your feet and it's blocked, that's the best, because then it becomes muscle memory. That's the easiest way for me to learn, is when through the action of being on your feet and finding the interaction with the set and the props and the other characters. That's the easiest way for me. But otherwise, I'm just, I usually just block off a line and block off the next line and just do sort of a rote memorization first, and then I'll let that go.
And that then sinks in for you.
Yeah. It's not perfect. It'll become reinforced once I'm up on my feet.
So you make, just like everybody, you make certain errors when you're in rehearsal, but by over time it becomes locked in.
Yes.
What's if you can think of it, what's the best direction you've ever been given by a director?
Probably to stop thinking.
Stop thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know there's a famous, you say that there's a famous, I'm trying to remember exactly what movie it was. It might have been Some Like It Hot, but Billy Wilder was directing, I'm pretty sure I got it right, and I may have it all screwed up, but Billy Wilder was directing Jack Lemmon, and Jack Lemmon was not sure what he was doing, and Billy Wilder got in his face and yelled at him and said, "Stop acting." And that's sort of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Just be.
Get out of your own way. Get out of your own way. Stop thinking so much and just go. Yeah.
What do you do? Well, now you've got your kids and so on, but what is your, I guess philosophy is also a good word here. When you're between gigs and you are hoping to look for, or hoping to get something, to book something, how do you handle your actor's life? Is it that you turn to the writing, or what else do you have something else? Do you go to the gym? What do you do?
I do go to the gym. I used to be a really avid runner. I've just started exercising again. I think I waited for the pandemic to end. I'm waiting until everyone's fully vaccinated. And now I feel like I can get on the treadmill without having a panic attack. So I do go to the gym. I have produced some theater, and I've produced some award shows, and I enjoy that work, but it's not, I don't like to produce my own work, or I like that to be separate from the projects that I'm in. So I've had years, particularly when I was pregnant or having, my kids were really little, where I was working mostly on theatrical production work or award show work. Yes.
Is that the best way that you can refresh your well? Is just by physically doing things and being a mother and so on? Is that
No, the
no?
best way I can refresh my well is getting on a plane by myself with a backpack and going to see the world and drinking good wine and going to museums and talking to friends all night and doing all the things that have been not possible to do in the last 2 years.
Well, you for a couple of reasons. You got kids, and
Yeah.
we had a pandemic. You can't do either one.
Yes.
So you've missed that then, the
Oh,
ability to go.
desperately.
Yeah.
Desperately.
What do you do instead? You've got to? There's got to be some way that you break out of your mold somehow. Do you find quiet time within the house, or how do you do it?
I think writing has become that for me in
Mhm.
a lot of ways because it's one of my only outlets. I've written more in the last year and a half than I've ever written.
And does your family understand mom's writing now?
They do. They do. My 4-year-old I tried to have her watch a Zoom reading of it was two actors on stage. They were now actually, not just readings, doing a Zoom reading. They're, holding their scripts, acting, and she was watching this play. And she looked at me, and about 5 minutes in, she said, "But where is the singing and dancing?" And I said, "Well, honey, some straight plays, just some plays don't have music and dancing. They're just speaking. She's just going to talk the whole time." I said, "Yes." And it was my two-hander. So one character had to play 7 roles, but there were no costumes. And she was like, "But where are the other characters?" She wanted nothing to do with it. She threw herself on the floor and was like, "I'm done. This is boring."
She wants music and lyrics. She's going to be a musical theater aficionado.
Yeah.
Well, I've been talking to the divine Sarah Bierstock for almost an hour now, and we're going to wind this down a little bit. And I'm just wondering, you've clearly worked with and met lots of various and sundry, I assume, interesting people over time in your career to date. Can you relate to us a story that's either weird, quirky, strange, oddball, or maybe just plain funny?
I was thinking about 2 different stories. They're very different. One of them, and I can't recall who, but another of your guests mentioned something similarly happened to them. I was playing the role of Lily in Annie, and I can dance. I'm not a great dancer. I can certainly dance better than your average, layman, but I'm certainly not of the caliber that we expect in a Broadway chorus. But I was playing Lily, and I was getting ready to come on stage, and I had just had my wig changed. And I had my wig cap on, and I had the little pins in just so, but just as I was about to enter from the wing, I felt this feels a little loose. This feels a little bit like this is not going to stay on my head. But there was no time. It was time to go on stage, and I saw the actor playing Rooster on there, and we got through the scene and started dancing Easy Street, singing and dancing Easy Street. And I remember the particular turn that I took, and the wig just detached off of my head. And I had this, this incredible blonde, crazy Lily wig. And in real life, I had this dark, curly, long hair. There was like no hiding it. And it's hanging off my head with the wig cap on, and the pins are here. And so I proceed to try to sing the whole rest of this song, dancing while holding my, delicately holding my head on with my elbow bent and my arm raised and spinning around, thinking it's fine that Lily's got her arm in 90-degree angle. That was just a choreography choice. Oh God.
And did the audience pick up on it? Did they laugh at all?
God, they had to have. I mean, there was no way. It was just hanging off of my head.
Was this on a tour or in a sitting production?
It was on a tour. Yeah, I was mortified. And then of course, Rooster was a friend of mine, and we were just dying. There was just no way. They were, because what are you going to do? You're looking, he couldn't reach over and pull it down, so.
I love theater stories like that because it's live and there's nothing you can do. You think sets don't work and guns don't go off and all those things that happen when you're live on stage. And I think that's fantastic. All right, last question for you today, Sarah.
Okay.
Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those that may just be starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to rise up to that next level?
For me, I always felt scared that if I lived a full life, meaning if I took time off to do something else, or if I got married, or if I had kids, or if I traveled, if I did something outside the arts, that it was going to prevent me in some way from growing in my craft or having my career move forward. like taking a huge turn, becoming a playwright instead of sticking with straight acting. And I have learned that that is the absolute opposite, that your instrument is all of you. And that the more life that you can live, the more you allow yourself to grow and change, the better actor, the better artist that you are going to be. You have so much more to offer. And so my advice is don't stop living. You've got to live all over, all parts of yourself. If you get so myopic and trying to succeed in this one area, it can really shut down your ability to do it well, because you're cutting off the rest of yourself. So my advice would be, focus, train, do the work you need to do, be prepared, but then you also need to live your life.
I think that is extremely wise and valuable. And because a lot of people do get tunnel vision and locked into that one thing and they're laser focused and the rest of everything falls away. And that's not helpful to a whole career.
It's not even helpful to what you can bring into the room on that given day, because you just want it too much and you push it away from you. It's hard to understand that. It's really hard. It's like smelling. People can smell desperation far away.
Absolutely, they can. Well, very valuable advice. Sarah Bierstock, this has been a terrific hour on StoryBeat, and I can't thank you enough for joining me on the show today and sharing all this wisdom and all your great experiences. So I just can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Steve. It was really fun. I so appreciate you having me on.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.